It won an Oscar. It was Roger Ebert's Film of the Year. It's revered decades on. It's a much-loved movie. It was a box office flop. Let's get into the story of 2000's Almost Famous.
We would be honoured if you would join us.
Almost Famous is a film, as many of you know, written and directed by Cameron Crowe, with a cast including Deep Breath, Patrick Fugit, Billy Crudup, Frances McDormand, Kate Hudson, Jason Lee, Anna Paquin, Fairuza Baik, Noah Taylor, Philip Seymour Hoffman. It's a hell of an ensemble for a hell of a film, really. And at the end of last year, I dug out my 4K disc of Almost Famous, which has sat in shrink wrap for a painfully and embarrassingly long amount of time. I went back to it for the first time it must be about a decade or so, and pressed play, but inadvertently put the longer cut on. I was expecting the theatrical cut, and 3 hours of my life, nearly 3 hours of my life, just pretty much melted away. Also, towards the end of last year, I read Cameron Crowe's memoir, The Uncool. Now, this is a really terrific book. I highly recommend it. But also, you put it side by side with Almost Famous, and you become very aware they're doing similar jobs. So, this story is all about Cameron Crowe. That as a filmmaker, he'd broken through with some style. You look at his filmmaking CV, Fast Times at Ridgemont High is the first thing he wrote that's produced. He wrote The Wildlife. 1989, he writes and directs Say Anything. 92, he writes, directs, produces singles. And then he absolutely hits pay dirt with 1996's Jerry Maguire, a massive box office hit, an Oscar winner, the kind of thing that puts you right near the top of the Hollywood tree. Now, in tandem with this, around the same time Jerry Maguire was spiking, Steven Spielberg, David Geffen, and Jeffrey Katzenberg, 3 Hollywood figures, had gone off for assorted reasons, they'd pulled their funds to launch Hollywood's first big new studio in a generation. This was called DreamWorks SKG. And the right studio turned up at the right time for the right filmmaker, basically. Let's go even further back into Cameron Crowe's life, because, and The Uncool does a great job of telling you these stories. When he was just 15 years old, he took his love of music and his love of writing and broke into rock journalism. And by 16 years old, the age of 16, he was making a living on the staff of Rolling Stone magazine, where he then worked for a while. He was following bands on tour. He was writing features. He was interviewing artists and putting some fairly testy questions in their direction. And then over time, as he migrated to film, he looked to bring these two worlds together. And he explained, I wanted to find a way to tell a story that captured the people I'll never forget and the feelings I had meeting the bands, doing interviews, going to see shows. But then also, as he kind of pondered what this story would be, he added that I didn't want it to be like some of those semi-autobiographical stories that glorify the writer, because the truth is, I never felt the centre of any room I was in at the time. I was an observer. And so he directed effectively his life story with changes into a character called William Miller. And he posited William Miller as an observer, really, in the film, that he's the central character, but as you'll see, if you're familiar with the film, if you've not, do go and watch it. It really is great. He's on the side of the rooms for a lot of it. And so he set about writing it, William obviously standing in for him, and with the view that this character was basically the front row at the circus, and the film had to be seen through his eyes. Now, there are a couple of different drafts. There was a draft actually called Ricky Fedora. Let's go with Ricky Fedora, which had a role for David Bowie in it at one point. That, for whatever reason, didn't pan out. There was an early version of the script called The Journalist as well. But as soon, off the back of Jerry Maguire, I've just been listening to James L. Brooks do an interview with Simon Mayo on the Kermode and Mayo's Tape podcast. And Simon Mayo asked James L. Brooks about, after winning an Oscar for your first film and having so much success, what does it get you? And a Hollywood producer said, you get to make 2 more films. So off the back of Jerry Maguire, I'm not sure it stood at that point, like the mid going into the back end of the 1990s, you get 2 more films. You'd certainly get a bit of space to make the film that you wanted. People wanted to work with Cameron Crowe. There was DreamWorks, an artist-friendly studio, and a deal was struck that DreamWorks would back this next Cameron Crowe project. Problem was, well, then you've got to find the ensemble for this. Then you've got to make it. And I mean, hindsight is easy, right? But it was a risky film. So the casting director tasked with finding the actor to fill the shoes of the character of William Miller was someone called Gail Levin. And she took months. I mean, this role was cast very late in the day, actually. They were looking for an unknown, and they did loads of face-to-face interviews. They did taped auditions as well, people sending in tapes from all around America. And it was this, I mean, Joseph Gordon-Levitt got close to the role, apparently, but was seen as a little bit too old. That, as Cameron Crowe would reflect, if you look at the kid in Jerry Maguire, if you cast a kid the same age as the character, you get unexpected benefits of that. And it kind of leaned him a little bit away from Joseph Gordon-Levitt. Patrick Fugit, meanwhile, in Utah, put himself on tape, and they watched the tape, and it basically brought the search pretty much to an end. He was then flown out to meet Cameron Crowe. Now, the thing is, Patrick Fugit was in Utah. He was an absolute outsider to Hollywood. And, I mean, as Cameron Crowe would say, Patrick had never even been to Los Angeles before. And you could see he was taking it all in. And he conveyed that feeling of being a fan. And I immediately felt we were close to something. I think I knew we could make this movie when I met him. Well, they were already down the road of making the movie. But let's just focus on Patrick Fugit for a minute, because here he was about to headline a big Hollywood production. This was not going to be a cheap film. And, I mean, he admitted he was terrified. He was awestruck by it all as well. And, I mean, he was set a lot of music homework, you'll be surprised to hear, by Cameron Crowe to get him into the role. I mean, the guy hadn't even been born in 1973 when the film was going to be set. He had no recollection of the music of that era, heard the odd song here and there, but Cameron Crowe prescribed a bunch of albums from people like Led Zeppelin, The Who, Neil Young. I think he got close to a role in the film as well. David Bowie, Peter Frampton. And Crowe told his young star, I want this stuff coming out of your pores. And so Patrick Fugit listened to the music, listened to these albums pretty much on loop, listened to it religiously. And now, I mean, he's a huge fan of it. Then he was exploring and finding it for the first time. Now, one of the absolute flybys on the casting of Almost Famous was Brad Pitt. Now, the casting of Brad Pitt in the film, in the key role of Russell, this made DreamWorks happy. Now they had basically a movie star in the film. And so Sarah Polley was set to play the role of Penny. Kate Hudson came in an audition. She was going to be the older sister, Anita. But then there were casting changes. Sarah Polley dropped out. She'd done interviews about this. She's gone on to direct a couple of terrific films as well. But Brad Pitt had put 4 months in working with Cameron Crowe to develop his character. And in fact, when Patrick Fugit was cast for the first time, Brad Pitt was still on board. And Fugit would tell Uproxx, I went in and Cameron introduced me to Brad. He was sitting in Cameron's office. Brad could tell I was nervous, but I was excited to get into things. So broke the ice by talking about PlayStation, and they talked about other stuff for about 15, 20 minutes before they got into it. But after 4 months, Brad Pitt decided this wasn't for him. He wasn't going to carry on. And Cameron Crowe has been open about the fact that he, quote, wept when he got... There's a podcast, Origins, which went into Almost Famous. And it's on there that Crowe it was an absolute hammer blow. But he did say, I knew that he'd never fully fallen in love with the character. He'd fallen in love with the idea of the character. But maybe there just wasn't enough on the page, as we're going to find out. There were a lot of pages as well. There had been rumours at the time that it was to do with money. But Cameron Crowe, again, told that Origins podcast, he was as much inclined to think it was to do with the age difference between a couple of the characters that kind of unnerved Brad Pitt a little bit. Maybe, don't know. Brad Pitt's never talked about this. Was it a combination of money, that age difference, just something not gelling? Didn't matter in the end. He was out of the film. And, it wasn't the only casting flyby either. I mean, Meryl Streep was in the running for the role that eventually went to the brilliant double Oscar winner, Frances McDormand. Natalie Portman was in the running for the role of Penny Lane. Jack Black auditioned for a key role of a supporting character, Lester Bangs, absolutely pivotal to both the book and the story. Kate Hudson had come in and auditioned, been cast in a completely different role. And so there was just this gap now with the character of Russell. Because, because Cameron Crowe carried this weight over from Jerry Maguire, he had the latitude that he didn't have to replace Brad Pitt with a movie star. And in the end, it was Billy Crudup and Jason Lee who were cast as the bandmates in the group Stillwater that we see in the film. Then Cameron Crowe brought in proper music star Peter Frampton, who schooled them on basically being a 1970s rock band. And as Frampton said, coming into the film, Billy knew how to hold a guitar. He could play a few chords and he could do some fingering, said he, very basic stuff. But he also said, we didn't have a lot of time before shooting, so I wasn't able to teach him the A, B, C, D, E's of guitar all the way through to Z. We sort of went A, D, K. But Frampton said he was such a willing pupil, it became almost an intuitive thing. He was jamming with the band incredibly fast. And he said it was amazing. What thrills me the most is that Billy picked up the guitar for the role, but hasn't put it down. And in fact, hasn't put it down. But still, weeks and weeks of rehearsal, all the time they're rehearsing, Jason Lee's letting his hair grow as well. In terms of the filmmaking as well, Cameron Crowe made a key hire. He brought in John Toll to be the director of photography, an experienced DP. The 1970s very much his oxygen. And as Crowe said, the man's a genius. He said, before we began filming, I talked to him about how I remembered the 70s, the feeling I wanted to capture. John Toll took this in, worked on the look. And as Cameron Crowe said, the movie doesn't feel like someone's golden hazed memory. He really wanted to avoid that. It feels like it's happening right now. And the choice they made fairly early on was, for a lot of the film, what you're going to have steady cams working, and you're going to have moments where you follow characters around. A lot of the time, in just like capturing that I'm an observer from the front row, they would use a static camera, which will put a lot more emphasis on the actors having to do the work. The camera would be still, and you would have this fixed position, observing what was going on. The green light got given with a 172-page screenplay. Now, the rule of thumb of a screenplay is 1 minute of screenplay is 1 minute of screen time. It's only a rough rule of thumb, but it's not a bad one. And Cameron Crowe would reflect many years later, 20 years on actually, to Rolling Stone, about how the film got the green light. And he admitted it was basically a freebie because of Jerry Maguire. And Steven Spielberg talked to Cameron Crowe and just said to him, shoot every word. And then he said, when we lost Brad Pitt, there was no pressure to find this other star. Spielberg instead said to him, the script is the star. And so, May 1999, the filming begins on Almost Famous. It was going to be a long shoot. It was going to be a hell of a road trip as well for basically 3 months. The cast and crew travelling around, getting their shots. A band on tour, really. There was a challenge to a degree for Cameron Crowe that he had to face of separating out the character of William from the person he was, let's just say, loosely based on. But then there was also capturing the concert footage as well, because, the band Stillwater had to look convincing. And in fact, the first concert scene was shot at the San Diego Sports Arena. They brought in a couple of hundred extras. And then it was the band go out to play in front of them. And as Cameron Crowe said, it was a miracle to me that the band found their voice so quickly. It was really important as well, because he said, going into the film, my biggest fear was they would look like a movie band. But I think they captured a feeling of a real band in that era. They looked and sounded like a genuine journeyman American band trying to make it to the next level. And I was actually sorry that these guys would go in 4 different directions when our movie wrapped, because I want to see them play again. And they did a couple of concert scenes, one point in front of 1,500 people, and they really, they've admitted, I think Billy Crudup and Jason Lee both said, when they heard the noise of the crowd, they really got into it. You don't get that as a movie actor; you get it as a theatre actor. The interaction with the audience. Here, they were getting electricity off it. Kate Hudson gave an interview where she said, I was in the crowd. We just really got into it. It almost didn't feel like a film shoot, really, because Kate Hudson, by this stage, had been cast when Sarah Polley dropped out in that role of Penny Lane. That she was originally in a different part in the picture because of the casting jiggling around. Now she was effectively the female lead in it, and it would be a star-making performance for her, and rightly so as well. Now, the shoot went on and it went on its travels, but it went on for a long time. A 92-day shoot, almost unheard of as we're recording now in 2026. And the 100-day club of film shoots, it feels almost relegated to the past. Now you need to be shooting 3 films back-to-back to get past 100 days. For a film like this, not a massive blockbuster, to do 92 days was a lot. And in fact, the Los Angeles Times would report that it basically gone around a month over schedule. It also said the budget had gone over, that it was up to $15 million over budget in the end. I can't find anything to back that up. The final budget is quoted at $60 million, which is a lot for a non-movie star driven, effectively a drama, really, isn't it? And so, I mean, it was a hefty investment from DreamWorks. DreamWorks was also paying to house Cameron Crowe's production company as well. I think it housed it on its lot for 3 years. And so it was a hefty investment in the filmmaker and the film. Vinyl Films is Cameron Crowe's production company. They had, even though the shoot was long, I mean, someone like Philip Seymour Hoffman, they could only have him for 4 days, and he had a bad cold when he came in as well. The other restriction was to do with its star. Patrick Fugit was 16 when the film was being shot. And so the working laws meant there were only so many hours he could do a day. That also took the shoot over schedule. And over the course of 3 months as well, there's another practical problem too. Patrick Fugit grew by 3 inches, and so his costume had to be continually refitted. And by the end, Billy Crudup was having to wear platform shoes. Fugit's voice altered slightly over the shoot as well. So all these little challenges just across a 92-day production. Crowe was shooting lots of film as well. He was really keen on getting the detail right, recreating the old Rolling Stone offices in San Francisco. You look at the crowd scenes and all the extras are in absolutely the right costumes. And I mean, he knew he was lucky. And he told Entertainment Weekly an anecdote about after shooting the first scene with Philip Seymour Hoffman as Lester Bangs, he called up David Geffen, one of the 3 presidents of DreamWorks SKG. He was the G. And just basically said, thank you for letting me make this movie. I can't believe I'm getting to make it. And Crowe said, I just got him on the phone and said, I'm really, really happy we're making this movie. I can't believe what brought me to this day where I can film Philip Seymour Hoffman as Lester Bangs. And David Geffen goes, Jerry Maguire is what brought you here. I have to go. And he hung up. October 1999, then, the film goes, the film wraps and goes into post-production. And the theatrical cut of the film came in the end at 122 minutes. There is a longer version of this. It's not called a director's cut per se, but there is an extended edition of the movie that came out. But still, it was due. It was going to debut at the Toronto International Film Festival September the 8th, 2000, and then it would be released widely it would be released in the United States, not widely initially, on September the 15th. Cameron Crowe threw himself into the publicity for it, did lots of interviews. Also, the budget for the film was slightly inflated by just the sheer size of the soundtrack for the movie. I think there's around 50 songs in Almost Famous. The usual cost of putting songs in a movie, $1 million, $1.5 million. This was $3.5 million on the budget to get the music. Even then, they couldn't get every track that they wanted. And weeks before the film was coming out, DreamWorks was having a bit of a wobble over it. I mean, it wasn't having a bad year. This was the year of Gladiator. But it was having a wobble. And so it decided to package a deal with Sony. This would be a deal that affected 3 films, selling the overseas rights to them. This was weeks before the release of Almost Famous. As such, Sony ponied up $100 million that gave it a 50-50 split on Almost Famous and overseas rights to Evolution. Remember that? Directed by Ivan Reitman, starring David Duchovny, and Barry Levinson's film An Everlasting Peace. Still, DreamWorks, I mean, their initial release treated this as a kind of awards release, which to a degree it was, but also it cost $60 million to make. And so it held just over 400 word-of-mouth taster screenings around the US and decided it was going to roll the film out really slowly to try and get an audience. And then the word of mouth just gathers speed, gathers momentum, and then you get an Oscar run and a box office hit. That's like generally how it was expected to work. So we go to that opening weekend, which is September the 15th to the 17th, the weekend of the Sydney Olympics taking place. And Almost Famous opens up on 131 screens in the US in 8th place. That's 131 screens, 8th place, $2.3 million, and a really, really strong screen average of $17,669. By context, the number 1 film that week was The Watcher, which led to legal shenanigans, I think, over the way Keanu Reeves' role was beefed up in the advertising for that. That grossed 5.8 million for number one slot on 2,700 screens. I mean, the screen average for Almost Famous was comfortably the highest in the chart that week. And the reviews for the film were really, really, really strong as well. The critical response was just, I mean, Roger Ebert, again, I said at the start, he named it his film of the year. He wasn't alone in giving it really, really, really strong critical response. I mean, a couple of naysayers, really, but not that many. I mean, Cameron Crowe had delivered the film he wanted. It had got a terrific response from critics. And that early week one release looked really positive for word of mouth to keep building. And so it was fingers crossed. Will it keep building? Well, the second week, DreamWorks upped the screen count in the US to just over 1,000. And the film's up to number 3 at the box office, 6.9 million. Topping the chart, Urban Legends, Final Cut, 8.5 million. A re-release, well, The Exorcist 2000 Director's Cut, 8.1 million. But Almost Famous, Bring It On in the top 10, The Watcher, Bait, remember Bait? Nurse Betty's a really good film. What Lies Beneath, Space Cowboys, Woman on Top. I mean, nothing was smashing things up in the top 10 that week, but Almost Famous looked like it had a good run ahead of it. Its third week, the screen count inches up a bit, but hang on, the box office returns are going down. So now, week 3, 5.5 million, but on more screens, and the alarm bells are starting to ring. Remember the Titans opens in top place with $20.9 million. Almost Famous still in third, but Meet the Parents comes out the following week. The remake of Get Carter, what a film. Digimon the movie. I mean, it looks like the film is running out of fuel already. The following week, it's down to 9th place. This isn't displaying the behaviour of an Oscar winner. There's films like Lost Souls and The Ladies' Man, The Contender. That's not a bad film. Dr. T. I mean, it's out of the top 10 by week 6, and its screen count is starting to drop, and there's just this feeling that it ain't really catching on. The reason? Really catching on. I mean, in the US, by the end of its box office run, Almost Famous did what was seen as a puzzling $32.5 million. It had cost $60 million to make. It would only add just under $15 million outside the US. Box office gross worldwide, $47.3 million. I mean, that's, at the point of release, a box office flop. And much the eventual film story of Almost Famous, in the end, revolved around people trying to diagnose quite what had gone wrong. The Los Angeles Times piece in October 2000 was just really puzzled by it. I mean, its opening was, quote, seeing Cameron Crowe's entertaining ode to his days as a 1970s teen rock journalist, you'd think hit, and a profitable one, because with no stars, it certainly couldn't have cost much. Neither's turning out to be true. The Los Angeles Times wrote that one of the best reviewed movies of the year, Almost Famous, has failed to find an audience. Worse, the coming-of-age drama cost more than $60 million to produce, and then marketing distribution on top of that. And there was, I don't know, a little bit of grumbling in that Los Angeles Times, speculating, let's go with that, speculating that Los Angeles Times article that Cameron Crowe and DreamWorks weren't particularly thrilled with each other. To quote the piece, relations between the writer, director, producer and DreamWorks SKG, sources say, are strained. Crowe is questioning whether the studio could have done and spent more to sell his movie. DreamWorks, for its part, was said to be unhappy that Cameron Crowe had already set his next film and set it at Paramount, not at DreamWorks. He was going to go on to reunite with Tom Cruise on Vanilla Sky, and DreamWorks felt they'd really supported Almost Famous, and then when the Tom Cruise movie comes along, Cameron Crowe had gone elsewhere. Again, it's all tittle-tattle. We're not in the midst of all of this, and it's a bit of tabloid gossip. All sides hoped that come Oscar season, though, Almost Famous would get its rewards. And, well, acclaim certainly went its way, but the nominations were, in the end, a little bit on the light side, really. That it wasn't that Almost Famous didn't interest the American Academy, but that particular year, the 73rd Academy Awards, it got nominated for 4 Oscars. DreamWorks, meanwhile, its attention was on its bigger hope, Gladiator, which was picking up nominations left, right and centre and looked like a surer bet. Meanwhile, Almost Famous picks up 2 Best Supporting Actress nominations for Kate Hudson and Frances McDormand. Straight away, you've split the vote. Go back to when Thelma and Louise came out. Gina Davis, Susan Sarandon, both nominated for Best Actress. split the vote. Neither's going to win. The film editing from Sarkline and Joe Hutchin, that was nominated, and Cameron Crowe's screenplay was nominated, and he'd win. He would win for that. One solitary Oscar, though, wasn't in the Best Picture running. Almost Famous was kind of fizzling out a little bit. And ordinarily, that would be that. However, 20 years on, the film is revered. The longer cut of the film has come out and is preferred by fans of it, really. And it's substantially longer. I mean, it edges towards 3 hours, the longer cut, and it's really, really, really good. Also, I mean, you look at some of the ramifications from it. A stage musical debuted in San Diego in 2019, went to Broadway. Just take one song from the film, Elton John's song, Tiny Dancer, which wasn't really that popular in 2000. It wasn't a big hit, but it fit the film. And Elton John saw the film and just said, I've always loved Tiny Dancer. It means a lot to me it's included. And then as Tiny Dancer gets more and more famous over the years, Elton John keeps giving Almost Famous credit for it. Cameron Crowe would go on to do Vanilla Sky, but he keeps getting asked about Almost Famous. He's just written The Uncle, which is effectively the story told again from a different perspective. And it's a great film. And he would reflect to Entertainment Weekly many years later that even though he'd already found success as a director, he felt he was sort of playing a role in it. He said, I think we all stepped into our characters. My character is this distressed guy trying to make a decent movie out of my actual childhood. Completely stressful, but what I got a lot of joy over and still do is showing Patrick how much fun it is to make a movie. Almost Famous continues to get re-releases, continues to get screenings. Vanilla Sky would follow in 2001. Since then, I mean, Cameron Crowe's done Elizabethtown, the underrated We Bought a Zoo as well, a lower. Nothing really that high profile and that high budget, which is a shame. Hopefully there's something else somewhere along the lines. But if nothing else, I recommend this double bill combination of the extended cut of Almost Famous and the book The Uncool. Terrific stories, really, really well told. Both of them just deserve more success.